I didn't know panic had a scent until I flung open my front door, still in pajamas, and saw the empty porch where my son's life-saving medication was supposed to be. Instead, I caught a glimpse of Susan, the self-appointed ruler of the Maple Grove HOA, striding away with a plastic envelope in hand, as if she'd just picked up litter instead of the only thing keeping my 9-year-old from an ICU bed. I bolted down the steps, barefoot, heart hammering like a judge's gavel. She turned just in time to flash that smug grin, the one that usually came with a fine or a veiled threat. Unapproved porch clutter, she chirped, like she was doing the neighborhood a favor. What she didn't know, what she never bothered to ask, was that my son's medication wasn't just important. It was everything. And now it was in her trash bin. The day had started quietly enough. My son, Ethan, had just returned from the hospital after a minor flare-up of his rare autoimmune disorder. His medication needed to be refrigerated, signed for, and administered within 12 hours of symptoms appearing. His regular dose had been delayed, and I'd spent 3 exhausting days battling pharmacists, doctors, and a mail carrier to arrange an emergency delivery. The package was finally en route, and for once, everything seemed on track. Then Susan happened. When I checked my Ring doorbell footage, it played out like a low-budget crime documentary. The courier placed the box neatly on my doormat. Barely 5 seconds later, Susan appeared, bathrobe, flip-flops, and a mug that read "Boss Lady." She glared at the package like it had insulted her, then scooped it up with the ease of someone who'd done this before. She strolled to her pristine Cedar Lane house 2 doors down and vanished inside, like it was just another Tuesday chore. I rewound and replayed the video, hoping I'd misseen. I hadn't. By the time I reached her front lawn, I was shaking with rage. I knocked, rang the bell, nothing. Then I spotted her around the side of the house, tossing something into a black bin. There it was, the blue-labeled thermal pack, clearly marked prescription, medical, refrigerate immediately. I yanked open the lid, and my stomach plummeted. The box, still cold, was crumpled, half buried under coffee grounds and a moldy orange peel. The syringe pack inside was punctured, useless. Susan appeared, unfazed by my presence at her trash bin. She crossed her arms and launched into her HOA lecture tone, the kind that sounded like she was scolding you while offering tea. "I'll have to report you for trespassing," she said calmly. "You can't just leave packages lying around like it's a yard sale. This neighborhood has standards." I held up the ruined medication. "This is for Ethan. He needs this to breathe, Susan. It's not a throw pillow or a pair of sneakers. It's prescription medication." She sniffed. "Then maybe you should check your mail faster. Porch clutter's a code violation, Section C, line 12. I stared, stunned. She knew it was medication. She saw the label. She threw it out anyway, and now she was quoting HOA rules like they made her untouchable. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just Susan being petty. This was dangerous. This was criminal. And she had no idea who she'd just crossed. I didn't say another word. I snapped a photo of the package in the trash, gathered the evidence, and walked away. Ethan's condition was stabilized with emergency backup meds, but the clock was ticking, one slip, and we'd be back in the ER. I called my friend, Detective Harris, and asked if sabotaging life-saving medication counted as a felony. He didn't laugh. That evening, Susan doubled down. She posted in the Maple Grove Community Facebook group, ranting about entitled residents using their kids' medical excuses to dodge HOA rules. She named me, calling me unstable, dramatic, and a single mom who can't follow protocol. People liked the post. A few egged her on, clueless about what she'd done. What they didn't know, and what she was about to learn, was that I'd spent the last decade putting criminals behind bars. I dismantle lies on the witness stand like a surgeon. I don't bluff. I prosecute. And now I had a case. The next day, I filed a police report, submitted the Ring footage, and contacted the DA's office to start paperwork for criminal negligence and endangerment. I also requested an emergency Maple Grove HOA meeting. Susan was about to face consequences she couldn't charm her way out of. That night, I sat with Ethan, who didn't fully grasp what had happened, watching cartoons as he leaned against me. I looked at his small frame, his steady breathing now that the meds were working, and thought about how close we'd come to disaster, all because someone craved control. Susan had weaponized the HOA for years, fining people for birdhouses, tossing doormats, even reporting a guide dog to animal control. But this time, she'd endangered my son's life, and I'd make sure the courtroom knew it. The courthouse smelled of bleach and burnt coffee, fitting for the case I was about to present. I'd prepped for murder trials, fraud schemes, and corruption rings, but nothing fueled me like this. A local HOA tyrant who thought her clipboard gave her the right to jeopardize a child's life. My child. I stood before the judge with my motions typed and clipped, a thick evidence packet in hand. The clerk's eyes widened when she saw the photos, Susan's trash bin, the mangled prescription box, the medical labels smeared with coffee grounds. Even she couldn't hide her disgust. I'd filed for a temporary restraining order, an emergency injunction, and opened a criminal complaint. I wasn't here for a warning. I was here to make a point. Susan, meanwhile, seemed unbothered. She strutted into the emergency Maple Grove HOA meeting that afternoon in a coral blazer and oversized sunglasses, flanked by 2 board members who looked like they'd never read a contract. She sat at the head of the table, sipping iced tea like she was untouchable. When I walked in, she smiled like we were about to discuss a parking dispute. "Glad you could join us," she said, sliding a folder toward me. "Just in time for the disciplinary review." I didn't sit. "You're being investigated for endangering a child's life," I said, voice steady. "You should be finding a lawyer, not hosting meetings." She waved a hand. "Oh, please. The package wasn't labeled properly, and it was on your porch for over 20 minutes. That's a violation." I dropped a copy of the Maple Grove HOA bylaws in front of her. "There's no rule about emergency medical deliveries." I checked. "And even if there were, HOA codes don't trump federal law." "You tampered with a prescription, Susan. You're lucky I'm not charging you with obstruction yet." Her smile faltered for a split second before she recovered. "You can't talk to me like that. This is an internal HOA meeting." "This is a prelude to a courtroom," I shot back. "Speak carefully." That shut her up. A board member tried to pivot to conflict resolution, but I laid out my case: the ring footage, the medical necessity, the complete lack of justification for Susan touching the package, let alone trashing it. The board tried to stay neutral. Most failed. One woman wouldn't even look at me. Susan wasn't done, though. She launched into a speech about how her leadership had boosted Maple Grove's property values, how her strict codes prevented chaos, and how I was exploiting my legal career for personal vendettas. She even pulled out screenshots from the Facebook group, painting me as an unhinged parent. A few board members nodded like puppets, clearly intimidated. Then came Mr. Thompson, the Maple Grove HOA's oldest board member, a retired mechanic who rarely spoke. He walked in late, holding a USB drive in his weathered hand. He handed it to me without a word and sat in the back like he'd seen this play before. I didn't know what was on the drive, but I'd learned to trust quiet old men with tech. That night, I opened the files. They were from the Maple Grove HOA's internal security cameras, angle after angle of Susan spotting the box, reading the label, glancing around, and deliberately tossing it into her trash. One clip showed her snapping a photo of it before dumping it. She didn't just know what it was, she documented it. I sent the footage to Detective Harris immediately. The next morning, I got a call. Susan was being investigated for child endangerment and destruction of medical property. She was served papers. I could almost hear her perfectly curated world cracking. Susan fought back the only way she knew how: escalation. She posted a letter on every Maple Grove resident's door, accusing me of faking evidence, endangering community safety, and waging a smear campaign against a female leader. She called me vindictive, unstable, and even suggested Ethan's condition was exaggerated. That letter turned her negligence into malice. I printed every copy and added it to my legal file. She targeted others, too. A neighbor's therapy dog had vanished. Another family's accessibility ramp was removed without notice. A veteran was fined until he sold his home. The deeper I dug, the more I realized Susan wasn't just an HOA president. She was a bully in cardigans, hiding behind bylaws. So I did what I do best. I built a case. I collected stories, timelines, and sworn statements from 6 residents, plus 2 prior city complaints and a paper trail linking Susan to selective enforcement and potential fraud. At the next Maple Grove HOA meeting, Susan acted like nothing was wrong. She brought muffins, handed out community pride flyers, and thanked everyone for their patience during challenging times. But I saw the twitch in her eye when I walked in with a thick folder and a local news crew trailing behind. She'd started a fire, thinking it would scare me off. She forgot I was forged in flames. The night the news aired, Maple Grove felt different, quieter, like it was holding its breath. Susan's smile on TV had been desperate, her eyes betraying fear. Not the kind that makes you flee, but the kind that makes you dangerous. The next morning, I found a yellow violation sticker on my mailbox, non-compliant color scheme. My mailbox, unchanged for 6 years, was suddenly a community crisis. A neighbor texted me a photo of Susan going door to door, clipboard in hand, claiming I'd forged evidence and asking if I'd ever threatened anyone. She was unraveling, and it made her reckless. But her house of cards was collapsing from within. I hadn't forgotten Mr. Thompson's USB drive. Something about his quiet delivery told me there was more. So I visited his ivy-covered home on Pine Street. He poured 1 mug of coffee, sat across from me, and said, "She's been doing it for years. Most people just left." Doing what? I asked, though I knew. Taking things. Fining people. Turning the board against anyone who didn't obey. He slid a faded folder across the table, old Maple Grove HOA minutes, memos, emails, all showing a deliberate erosion of fairness. 3 board members resigned in a year. Susan replaced them with loyalists. Buried in the papers was a complaint from Laura Bennett, who'd lived on Oak Trail. Her accessibility ramp had been removed overnight under a fake aesthetic rule. The file included photos, ignored permits, and a doctor's note. I realized this wasn't just my fight anymore. Susan had built her empire on invented rules and consequences she never expected to face. With Mr. Thompson's permission, I scanned everything and gave it to Detective Harris. He was building the criminal case, but now he had a pattern: multiple victims, repeated harassment, and abuse of power. Meanwhile, Susan hosted a community unity seminar at the Maple Grove Clubhouse, complete with cupcakes and a slideshow titled Rebuilding Trust. It was like watching a magician pretend the rabbit hadn't escaped. I sat in the back, watching her click through slides about resident harmony. When she opened the floor for questions, I stood. "Susan, how does throwing away a child's medication promote harmony?" The room gasped. "I didn't know it was medication," she snapped, for the 5th time that week. Security footage disagrees. So does the timestamp. So does your own Maple Grove HOA camera system. I paused. "Did you think this would stay quiet?" Murmurs spread. A man asked, "Is it true you fined a veteran's flag for being too bold?" A woman added, "What about the therapy dog you reported for barking?" Susan stammered, but the room turned. A voice in the back muttered, "She doesn't speak for us." By the end, half the room had left. The rest stayed to demand a recall vote. The civil suit was filed: destruction of medical property, reckless endangerment, defamation, abuse of authority, and negligence. The evidence file had quadrupled. But the real blow came from the criminal investigation. The Maple Grove HOA's financials showed discrepancies, rounded amounts, odd reimbursements, payments to non-existent contractors. Susan had created a fake landscaping company under her sister's name, billing the Maple Grove HOA for work never done. It was fraud born of arrogance and sloppy paperwork. The DA was now considering charges beyond my complaint. By week's end, Susan was served a subpoena for a full financial audit and notified of criminal charges. Her Facebook went offline, her SUV stayed garaged, and the Maple Grove HOA's weekly newsletter vanished. Residents, inspired by the scandal, started Susan's saga, a thread of stories and photos, fines for overly festive Christmas lights, a citation for an unauthorized birdbath, a kid fined for scooter-related noise. Susan had built a petty dictatorship, but her downfall was written by those she'd silenced. The courtroom was silent, the kind that waits to see who breaks. I wasn't nervous, I was honed. Every moment since Susan trashed Ethan's medication had led here. The judge, a former colleague, skimmed the file with the exhaustion of someone used to HOA spats. But when he hit the child endangerment section, he paused, read closely, and glanced at Susan. She knew then. This was different. Susan had swapped her bright blazers for a gray suit, aiming for humility. Her lawyer, a mid-tier defense attorney, thought this was a neighbor dispute. But as I presented my case, the intercepted package, the ruined medication, the footage, the testimonies, it became clear this was about abuse, endangerment, and malice. I didn't need drama. I had evidence, and it scorched. Her lawyer called it a misunderstanding, claiming Susan didn't know the package's contents and that I was weaponizing my career. But the projector showed stills of Susan reading the label, photographing it, tossing it. Her own cameras betrayed her. His arguments crumbled against undeniable visuals. Witnesses sealed it. Mrs. Carter, whose accessibility ramp was removed, spoke with trembling hands but a fierce voice, describing how Susan ignored permits and fined her until she moved. Mike, a Gulf War veteran, choked up over fines for his flag. A teen girl recounted noise complaints for playing flute. One by one, they painted Susan as a tyrant wielding rules like daggers. The turning point was Susan's daughter, Emily, in her late 20s. Reluctant but honest, she admitted Susan punished dissenters. She described a childhood obsessed with appearances, where even their cat was rehomed for shedding. Emily recalled Susan bragging about fixing Maple Grove and calling the police on a neighbor for a blue mailbox. Then she said, "Mom once told me power's useless unless people feel it." I think she wanted people afraid. Susan flinched. When Susan testified, she played victim, clutching tissues, claiming she didn't see the label or mean harm, just a stressed steward of order. But her voice wavered, her tears were forced, and when I cross-examined, the lies unraveled. "You didn't see the medical label?" I asked. "I didn't notice," she said. "Even though you photographed it?" Silence. "Even though you cited the tracking number in a violation report?" More silence. "Even though you posted I was faking Ethan's illness?" The jury's faces hardened. Lies under oath offend even the impartial. The jury took 2 hours. They found Susan liable on all counts: negligence, destruction of medical property, emotional distress, defamation. The judge awarded punitive damages and banned her from Maple Grove HOA rolls. Then came the criminal charges. The DA had her financial records, fake invoices, kickbacks to her sister's shell company. She was served an indictment notice in the courtroom. Her disbelief was palpable, like she couldn't fathom her empire of fines collapsing. As I left, reporters swarmed. I kept it brief. This was about justice for my son and our neighbors. Inside, I burned not with vengeance, but with triumph. For Ethan, for the silenced, for every moment Susan stole under the guise of standards. A week later, Maple Grove buzzed with cautious joy. Lawns sprouted gnomes and flags, porches held swings again. Someone tied ribbons to their mailbox. It wasn't rebellion, it was freedom. Ethan was thriving, and knowing Susan faced consequences gave us peace. He didn't grasp the legal details, but he knew the scary lady wasn't in charge anymore. That was enough. The Maple Grove HOA held an emergency election. I declined to run. I had no interest in debating fence heights, but I helped rewrite the bylaws. Susan had twisted them into weapons, adding unvoted clauses, like one letting her override the board for aesthetic threats. We gutted her edits, and neighbors who'd stayed silent under her reign now volunteered, brought snacks, drafted rules. The Maple Grove HOA felt like a community, not a regime. Then came a twist. A month post-verdict, I found an unstamped letter in my mailbox, typed in an old font. "You won this round, but people like me don't vanish. We evolve. See you soon." No signature, but it screamed Susan, her drama, her venom, her refusal to lose gracefully. I gave it to Detective Harris, who added it to her file. Threatening letters wouldn't help her fraud trial. Fate had the last word. Weeks later, driving Ethan to baseball, I passed a roadside cleanup crew, orange vests, trash bags. There, head bowed, was Susan, her blonde hair in a tight bun. No clipboard. Her community service had started early, assigned to litter duty on Route 12, a road Maple Grove residents used daily. I slowed. She looked up, and recognition hit her like a slap. I gave a polite wave, not a smirk, just the kind she'd used when judging flower beds. Then I drove on. Ethan asked who she was. "Just the old Maple Grove HOA president," I said. "She's cleaning up now." He shrugged, more interested in his granola bar. That felt like the true end. The Maple Grove HOA's audit results sealed it. Pages of suspicious transactions, fake reimbursements, thousands siphoned to Susan's shell company. No one defended her. Her former allies distanced themselves, and her name became a warning in meetings. When someone suggested a strict rule, another would quip, "That's a bit Susan, isn't it?" Months later, the new Maple Grove HOA chair, Lisa, a librarian, threw a block party, no fines, just food, chairs, and karaoke. Ethan ran the lemonade stand. Kids carried signs reading Maple Grove HOA Free Zone, one with a cartoon Susan holding a trash bag. I didn't stop them. They'd earned it. As the sun set, I stood by the grill, soda in hand, watching neighbors laugh. For the first time since moving to Maple Grove, I felt at home, not surviving, but living. People thanked me, shared their Susan stories like battle scars. We laughed, because now we could. That night, I tucked Ethan in, kissed his forehead, and glanced at his medication shelf, safe, untouched. I didn't need Susan's apology or groveling. I needed peace, and I'd claimed it, one courtroom, one neighbor, one truth at a time. Maple Grove was free, and so were we.